The clink of a single glass in a silent room is one of the loneliest sounds in the world. It was a sound Elias Croft had become intimately familiar with. The small family-owned Italian restaurant, Johnny's, was his sanctuary every Tuesday night. It was the one evening he allowed himself to remember, to grieve. He always requested the same corner table, shrouded in shadows, its red and white checkered cloth a faded relic of happier times. He'd order the same meal, a bottle of Barolo, a medium-rare steak, and a side of roasted potatoes, and he'd eat it alone, the ghost of his wife, Clara, sitting in the empty chair opposite him. Tonight was no different. The rich tannic wine was a familiar comfort on his tongue. He was halfway through his steak, the world around him a soft, indistinct hum of other people's laughter and lives, when the bell above the door jingled. A gust of cold night air swept in, carrying with it a woman and a small boy. Elias didn't pay them much mind until he saw the host, a kind-faced older man named Marco, shaking his head with a pained expression. The woman's voice, thin and frayed at the edges, carried across the room. "Please," she said. "It's cold. We just need to get warm for a moment." "I am sorry, Signora," Marco replied gently. "We are very busy. All my tables are reserved." Elias's eyes swept the room. It was a slow Tuesday. There were at least 3 empty tables. Marco was lying. He was protecting the ambiance of his restaurant from what was obvious to anyone with eyes. The woman's coat was threadbare. The boy's sneakers were scuffed and splitting at the seams. They were poverty, and poverty was bad for business. A familiar bitterness, cold and sharp, rose in Elias's throat. He knew that look, the world's quiet, dismissive cruelty. He turned back to his wine, determined to ignore them. Not my problem, he thought. The mantra he'd adopted since his world had collapsed. Everyone has a cross to bear. But then he heard the boy's voice, small and plaintive. "Mama, I'm hungry." The words were a physical blow, landing directly on the bruise of Elias's own heart. He couldn't see the boy's face, but he could hear the raw need in those 3 words. It was a sound that bypassed all his defenses. He saw the woman's shoulders slump. She knelt, pulling her son close. "I know, baby. I know." And then she did something that shattered Elias's carefully constructed isolation. She turned, her gaze scanning the room, and her eyes, a startling, desperate blue, locked directly with his. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe in her late 20s, but hardship had carved premature lines around her eyes. She took a hesitant step towards his table, her son's small hand clutched tightly in hers. "Sir?" Her voice was a whisper, yet it cut through the restaurant's murmur. "I'm sorry to bother you. My son, he's hungry. Can we stay a while at your table? Just until he warms up?" Elias stared at her. 1,000 refusals danced on his tongue. He wanted his solitude. He wanted to commune with his grief in peace. He opened his mouth to deliver a curt no, but the boy peeked out from behind his mother's legs. He had a mop of unruly brown hair and wide hazel eyes that held a wisdom no child should possess. Those eyes. They were Clara's eyes. The air left Elias's lungs. It felt like a fist had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. The ghost in the opposite chair seemed to shimmer and fade, replaced by the living, breathing reality of this desperate pair. "The chair is empty," he heard himself say, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "Sit." Relief flooded the woman's face, so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm Sarah, this is Leo." Elias just gave a curt nod, gesturing to the empty chair. Leo scrambled onto it, his feet dangling high above the floor. Sarah sat more slowly, perched on the edge, her posture screaming that she was ready to flee at a moment's notice. An awkward silence descended. Elias looked at his half-eaten steak, suddenly feeling grotesque and gluttonous. He signaled a waitress. "Another menu, please," he said, "and a glass of milk for the boy." "Oh no, we can't," Sarah began, her face flushing. "I insist," Elias cut her off, his tone leaving no room for argument. It was the voice he'd used in boardrooms a lifetime ago. When the menu arrived, Sarah stared at it as if it were written in a foreign language. Leo, emboldened, pointed a small grubby finger at a picture of spaghetti and meatballs. "Can I have that, Mama?" Sarah's eyes welled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "Leo, honey, that's maybe just some bread." "He'll have the spaghetti," Elias said to the waitress. "And for the lady, the chicken parmesan, and another bottle of the Barolo." "Sir, Elias, we can't possibly accept this," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "We have no way to pay you back." "I didn't ask you to." he replied, taking a long swallow of wine. He wasn't being kind. He was being exorcised. Their presence was a disruption, an agony, but it was a different kind of agony from the one he was used to. It was alive. The food arrived. Leo ate with a voracious, joyful intensity that was mesmerizing. Sauce smeared across his cheeks. Sarah ate more delicately, but every bite was savored. A small miracle. As the wine loosened his tongue and the strange shared meal progressed, the walls began to crumble. "It's just us now," Sarah said softly, answering a question Elias hadn't asked. His father, he left a year ago. The bills piled up. The apartment, we lost it last week. Elias found himself speaking, the words torn from a place he kept locked. "I lost my wife, Clara, 2 years ago, cancer. This was our place." Sarah's eyes met his, and in their blue depths he didn't see pity, but a shared understanding of loss. "I'm so sorry," they talked. Or rather, they carefully placed fragments of their shattered lives on the table between the breadbasket and the wine bottle. He was a retired architect. She had been a teacher before she had Leo. The conversation was a delicate dance around gaping chasms of pain. When the plates were cleared, Leo, full and warm, grew sleepy. He leaned against his mother, his eyelids drooping. "We've taken too much of your evening," Sarah said, beginning to stand. "Thank you for everything. You have no idea what this meant." As she stood, her worn leather wallet slipped from her coat pocket, falling to the floor. It burst open, scattering a few dollar bills and old receipts, and a photograph. Elias, ever the gentleman, bent to pick it up. His fingers closed around the faded picture. It was a family portrait. A younger, happier Sarah, a man with his arm around her, and a small boy. Leo, a few years younger. But it wasn't Leo who stopped Elias's heart. It was the man. He was handsome, smiling broadly. And around his neck, on a thin silver chain, hung a distinctive pendant. A silver architect's compass, a replica of the one Clara had given Elias on their 10th anniversary. A one-of-a-kind piece. Elias's blood ran cold. He knew that face. He knew that pendant. The man in the photo was David, the man Clara had been having an affair with. His world, which had just begun to tilt back onto some new, uncertain axis, shattered all over again. The kindness, the shared meal, the fleeting connection, it was all a grotesque lie. He wasn't sharing a table with strangers. He was breaking bread with the remnants of the affair that had broken his wife's heart in the months before she died. The betrayal that had poisoned their final days together. He looked up at Sarah, his face a mask of stone, the photograph trembling in his hand. The heartbreaking drama of the evening had just become a tragedy. The air at the table, once warm with the spirit of reluctant communion, turned to ice. Elias slowly straightened up, the photograph held tight between his thumb and forefinger as if it were contaminated. The noise of the restaurant, the clatter of plates, the low murmur of conversations, faded into a dull, roaring silence in his ears. All he could see was David's smiling face, and all he could feel was the ghost of Clara's betrayal. A cold, sharp knife twisting in a wound that had never healed. This, Elias's voice was a low, dangerous rasp, so unlike the gruff but civil tone he'd used all evening. He thrust the photo toward Sarah. "Who is this?" Sarah's face, previously softened by food and wine, went pale. She looked from the photo to Elias's expression, and confusion gave way to dawning fear. That's my husband Ben, and Leo and me. That was taken a long time ago." His name, Elias bit out each word, was David. The color drained completely from Sarah's face. She took an involuntary step back, her hand flying to her throat. How do you know that name?" Leo, startled by the sudden shift in tone, whimpered and clutched his mother's leg. Elias let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. David, charming, wasn't he? Ambitious, had a taste for things that didn't belong to him. He tapped the pendant in the photo. My wife gave this to me. She had it custom made. He must have stolen it from my house. Or maybe she gave it to him. A token. The pieces were crashing together in Sarah's mind, her eyes wide with horror. "Clara? Your wife was Clara?" "So he told you about her," Elias sneered. "Did he tell you he was destroying our marriage? That he was fucking my dying wife?" "No." The word was a desperate gasp. "No, you have it wrong. Do I?" Elias's voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. Marco, the host, took a concerned step forward. But Elias waved him away with a furious slash of his hand. He worked for me. He was my junior partner. I trusted him. I brought him into my home, and he repaid me by seducing my wife while she was sick and vulnerable. Sarah was shaking her head, tears now streaming freely down her cheeks. You don't understand. He left us too. He left me and Leo a year ago. He emptied our bank accounts. He told me he was in love with someone else, that he was leaving the city.
He said her name was Clara. The revelation landed like a physical blow.
David had left them for Clara. The timeline was a sickening carousel, the final agonizing months of Clara's life, her emotional distance, her secret phone calls. Had she been planning to leave him for David? The thought was a fresh hell he'd never allowed himself to fully consider. He told me they were going to be happy, Sarah sobbed, her composure completely gone. He said she was everything I wasn't, and then he was just gone. We were left with nothing. The humiliation, the debt. I lost everything because of her. Because of your wife. They stood there, frozen in a standoff of mutual devastating hatred, bound together by the same man's treachery. Two lives wrecked on the same sharp, selfish rocks. The shared meal in their stomachs felt like a poison. He ruined us both, Elias whispered, the fight going out of him replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. Yes, Sarah choked out, pulling a trembling Leo closer. He did. And then the little boy, who had been listening with a quiet intensity that belied his years, looked up at Elias. His mother's tears seemed to frighten him more than the angry words. He tugged on Elias's sleeve. Elias looked down into those hazel eyes, Clara's eyes, that had disarmed him hours before. Mister? Leo's voice was small but clear. Why are you so sad? The simple, direct question shattered the last of Elias's anger. This child was not David. He was not Clara. He was just a boy, caught in the devastating wake of adult failings. He was hungry and lost, and his mother was crying. Elias sank back into his chair, the photograph fluttering from his numb fingers onto the table. The great yawning chasm of his grief was now filled with a new complicated horror. He had just shared a sacred grieving space with the woman whose life had been equally destroyed by the same tragedy. They were adversaries and allies, victims of the same cataclysm. I'm sad, Elias said to Leo, his voice hollow, because the world is a very confusing place. He looked at Sarah, truly looked at her, not as an intruder or a proxy for his enemies, but as another soul adrift. The anger was gone, leaving only a vast, desolate pity. For her, for Leo, and for himself. What will you do? He asked, his tone flat. Sarah wiped her face with a napkin, trying to regain some dignity. I don't know. The shelter closes at 9. We should go. The word shelter hung in the air, a final crushing detail. Elias thought of his large, silent, empty house, filled with nothing but expensive furniture and ghosts. He thought of the empty chair opposite him, a monument to a love that had been fractured long before it was ended by death. And he looked at this mother and child, whose very existence was a testament to his own personal betrayal, yet who were now just two human beings with nowhere to go. He couldn't let them go, not like this. The connection was monstrous, but it was a connection nonetheless. In the ruins of their shared history, there was a terrible, binding truth. He pulled out his wallet, placed a stack of bills on the table, more than enough to cover the meal, and stood up. No, he said. Sarah looked at him, bewildered. No, you're not going to a shelter. The words felt alien in his mouth, an impulse from a self he thought long dead. I have a house. It has too many empty rooms. You can stay there tonight, just tonight. He saw the conflict in her eyes, distrust, pride, but also the raw, desperate need to provide safety for her son. Why? She whispered. After what you know? After what we are to each other? Elias picked up his coat, his movement slow and deliberate. He finally understood the unforgettable, cruel twist of their evening. They were not strangers. They were kin, bound by a shared villain. Their meeting was not a coincidence. It was a collision of two wreckages from the same disaster. Because, he said, his gaze falling once more on Leo, your son is hungry. And this time the word hungry meant so much more than a need for food. It was a hunger for safety, for stability, for a world that wasn't cruel. It was a hunger Elias had felt for 2 long years, a hollow ache he'd tried to fill with wine and memory. He held the door open for them, stepping out into the cold night. Sarah, holding a sleepy Leo in her arms, hesitated for only a moment before she followed him. They walked down the street together, not touching, a fractured, impossible trio, the cuckolded husband, the abandoned wife, and the little boy with the eyes of the woman who had in her own way betrayed them both. The heartbreaking drama was over. Now the painful, complicated aftermath was just beginning.